The porch light flickered above me as I stood at my wife's window and saw my brother-in-law slip her rings into his pocket. Still, I didn't move, just tapped my thumb once against the railing to steady my breath. As the faint buzzing of that bulb grew louder, it felt like it was drilling the truth into my skull. While its tremble lit his silhouette, I understood why Linda's eyes had dulled weeks before she died. The same wavering glow showed me the line between heartbreak and clarity. That's when I decided, some justice begins in silence, but it never ends there. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The sky over Savannah looked heavy enough to collapse. Gray clouds hung low above the riverside cemetery, muffling every sound except the soft rustle of oak leaves. Charlie Whitford stood at the front row, hands folded neatly over each other, staring at the mahogany casket that held his wife of 43 years. His posture was still, almost rigid, but not from cold. It was the kind of stillness that comes from a man who has already cried every tear he has left. The pastor's voice floated gently through the autumn air, offering words about Linda's kindness, her gentle spirit, her devoted marriage. People nodded, murmured, sniffled. Charlie didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the flowers atop the casket, white lilies, her favorite, even as everything inside him felt like sinking sediment in dark water. He barely registered the shuffling behind him until a sudden, raw voice split the air like a snapped branch. "It's your fault she died." Every head turned. The pastor froze mid-sentence. A chorus of gasps rippled across the crowd. Jason Whitford, Charlie's son, stood 3 rows back, red-faced, trembling, eyes burning with a fury only grief could forge. His fists were clenched at his sides as if he'd been holding that accusation inside his chest for months. Charlie didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He only drew in one slow breath, steady enough not to be seen. Jason stepped forward, his voice cracking. "You weren't there. You left her alone. You always left her alone." His words were thick with grief and something darker, years of resentment that had been waiting for this exact moment to erupt. Charlie remained silent. The pastor tried to intervene with a gentle, "Jason, this isn't the time," but Jason shoved past him. "I'm talking to my father," he snapped, before lunging toward Charlie. For a moment it looked like he might actually strike him. Several guests recoiled. A woman dropped her program. But before Jason could cross the last few feet, Mara, his younger sister, grabbed his arm. She wrapped both hands around him, digging her heels into the wet ground. "Jason, stop it," she pleaded, her voice shaking. But Jason fought against her grip, rage twisting his face. Tears streamed down his cheeks, carving lines through the redness. "He let her die, Mara. He let Mom die." Charlie still didn't move. His expression remained carved in stone, his gaze locked forward. Because if he turned around, if he allowed even a fragment of emotion to crack through, he feared all the truth he'd been holding back would burst into the open far too soon. Mara finally managed to pull Jason back a step, then another, whispering fiercely, "Not here, please, not here." Jason's breathing came in harsh, ragged bursts. He wiped angrily at his face, glaring at Charlie with a hurt so deep it looked ancient. A few yards away, under the shade of an old moss-draped oak, a man watched with quiet interest. Victor Hale, middle-aged, sharply dressed, posture too polished for a funeral. His expression was unreadable, no anger, no sympathy, just calculation. His gaze drifted between Charlie and Jason like he was observing a performance he'd already seen the ending of. Charlie finally glanced in Victor's direction, just a flicker of recognition, a faint tightening in his jaw. Victor met his eyes for half a second, then looked away, adjusting the sleeves of his charcoal coat with an ease that felt wrong for the moment. Guests whispered, some shook their heads, others stared at Jason with thin-lipped judgment, but Charlie seemed detached from all of it. He slowly lowered his head, his chin dipping just enough that his face slipped out of sight behind the brim of his old black funeral hat. It wasn't shame. It wasn't surrender. It was something else entirely, a deliberate retreat inward. Mara led Jason back to their seats, his body still trembling with rage. When she finally released him, Jason sank down heavily, breathing like he had run miles. His eyes stayed locked on Charlie, full of bitterness. The pastor hesitated, uncertain whether to continue, but Charlie gave him a small nod, just enough permission to move on. His voice resumed, shakier than before, filling the uncomfortable silence with words about rest, peace, eternal life. But Charlie didn't hear any of it. Under the quiet hum of the sermon, beneath the weight of the accusations, Charlie's mind drifted back to the truth he carried alone, something he discovered in the weeks before Linda passed, something that changed how he saw every moment of her final days, something he wasn't ready to speak aloud, not yet. His silence wasn't guilt. It was armor. And for now, it was the only thing keeping the fragile pieces of his world from shattering in front of everyone gathered here. As the pastor invited the family for the final viewing, Charlie lifted his head at last, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Jason watched him with hatred. Victor watched him with curiosity. But Charlie, he watched the casket. And somewhere deep inside him, the truth he carried pulsed like a buried fuse waiting for the right moment to ignite. The cemetery emptied slowly, the way places of grief always do, people leaving in clusters, murmuring condolences as if volume alone might soften the weight of loss. But Jason didn't wait for the polite drifting of the crowd. The moment the pastor closed the ceremony, he spun away from the folding chairs with the force of someone fleeing a burning building. "This is exactly what you always do," he snapped over his shoulder, loud enough for half the guests to hear. "Stand there like some emotionless statue and pretend you cared." Charlie watched him march across the gravel path, fists stuffed into his pockets, shoulders rigid with fury. He didn't chase after him. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood with his hands clasped in front of him, breathing steady, letting the storm swirl without stepping into it. "Emotional neglect," Jason muttered again, though now mostly to himself, before disappearing behind a line of parked cars. Charlie didn't move. He'd learned long ago that grief speaks louder than truth in its first hours. Mara approached from behind, her eyes swollen but gentle. She took a shaky breath before touching his arm. "Dad, I'm so sorry. You know Jason doesn't mean half the things he says. He's just—" She shook her head, unable to finish. "He's hurting." "I know," Charlie replied quietly. But Mara's eyes lingered on him, studying his calm face the way someone studies a closed door they've never been allowed to open. "You weren't surprised," she said softly. "Not by him, not by anything today." Charlie met her gaze, offering a small, reassuring smile, but nothing more. He wasn't ready, not for the truth, not for the fallout it would bring. Before Mara could say anything else, footsteps approached with the kind of confidence that didn't belong at funerals. Victor Hale. His suit was immaculate, untouched by the damp earth or shifting winds. He carried a single envelope in his hand, though he didn't offer it, almost as if he wanted it seen without being used. "Charlie," Victor said, voice low, smooth, practiced. "I'm truly sorry for your loss. Linda was remarkable. I can't imagine what you must be feeling." Charlie dipped his head politely but took a step backward, widening the distance between them. Something about Victor's presence felt off, as if his sympathy came from a script rather than a soul. Victor continued unfazed. "If you need help with anything, paperwork, arrangements, sorting through her things, I was there for her quite a bit near the end. I know it can be overwhelming." Charlie's jaw tightened. Near the end. He'd heard Victor use that phrase twice already today, twice too casually, twice with details Linda never mentioned. Mara shifted beside him. "Thank you, Victor," she said, though the hesitancy in her voice suggested even she felt something was strange. Charlie gave a curt nod, offering no invitation, no conversation, not even the politeness expected of a grieving husband. He simply said, "I appreciate the words," and turned away, guiding Mara toward the car. As the door closed, he glanced once more at Victor, still standing there, still watching, still unreadable. The drive home wound through Savannah's historic streets, oak branches arching overhead like a cathedral of shadows. Mara spoke softly about arrangements, food deliveries, people dropping by. Charlie answered in short, calm sentences. She kept studying him, searching for the crack in his composure. When she finally asked, "Dad, is there something you're not telling me?" he didn't deny it. He only said, "Grief makes everything feel hidden." It was enough to silence her, but not enough to satisfy her. After she left for the night, the house settled into an oppressive quiet. Linda's photographs lined the walls, her favorite candles still unlit on the mantel. Charlie walked through the room slowly, touching the edges of tables she once dusted, the chair where she'd knit for hours. Then he stopped at her bedside drawer, the drawer he hadn't opened since the night she passed. He slid it open gently and pulled out the worn, brown notebook, Linda's notebook. The cover was soft from use, the corners bent. He sat on the edge of the bed, turning the pages with careful fingers. Her handwriting filled the journal, but not with the soft reflections he expected. Instead, sharp, clipped notes appeared, dates, numbers, questions, names. Entries about bank withdrawals she didn't understand. Mentions of someone helping with decisions. Repeated references to moments when she felt uneasy. And then the initials. VH. Charlie closed his eyes, steadying the mix of grief and fury pulsing beneath his ribs. The truth he'd begun piecing together in her final weeks now felt even heavier. He wasn't ready to speak it. Not yet. He closed the notebook, resting his hand on its cover as though he were holding Linda's hand instead. In the still, quiet house, he whispered into the dimness, "I'm not ready to speak, not yet." And somewhere outside, the wind rattled the porch chimes, softly, like a warning that silence could only hold for so long. The house felt colder the next morning, as if Linda's absence had seeped into the walls overnight. Charlie rose before sunrise, unable to sleep past the point where memories turned from comforting to unbearable. The notebook sat on the nightstand where he'd left it, its worn cover almost glowing in the sliver of early light cutting through the curtains. He picked it up slowly, letting the familiar weight settle into his hands. It still smelled faintly of Linda's lavender lotion, soft, calming, deceptive in the comfort it offered. When he opened to the first page of entries he'd skimmed the night before, a deep ache moved through him. The writing was uneven, the loops of her letters trembling slightly. Her illness had made her hands unsteady, but these entries weren't about sickness. They were about fear. He began rereading, line by line. "Withdrawal again today. I don't understand. He said he'll help with the accounts while Charlie is away. I hate feeling confused. I hate troubling anyone. Is this normal, should I ask?" The words had a desperation he'd missed the first time, back when he'd been too consumed by grief to interpret anything clearly. He turned the page. He insists it's routine, but why so much money? I don't want Charlie to worry. Maybe I am overreacting. Charlie felt his throat tighten. Linda had never kept financial concerns from him. For decades, they'd balanced their budget together at the kitchen table with coffee and quiet humor about how life never got simpler, only more expensive. She wasn't someone who hid money problems, unless someone had convinced her to. His eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, where she'd scribbled two initials more than once. VH. He'd noticed them last night, but this time the letters felt heavier, darker. As he flipped through the journal, the initials appeared again and again, sometimes circled, sometimes underlined, sometimes squeezed between hurried notes. Charlie leaned back in his chair, the realization pressing down hard. Victor hadn't just been around to help. He had been deeply woven into the final weeks of Linda's life, far more than Charlie ever knew. The notion twisted in his chest, suffocating. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, tracing Linda's handwriting with a trembling finger. He tried to push the ache aside, but his mind pulled him back, 2 months before her death. A late evening. The sound of Linda's voice drifting down the hallway, hushed, tense. At the time, he had assumed she was speaking to Mara, who often checked in during the nights Linda couldn't sleep. But now the memory sharpened. Linda's tone hadn't been gentle or maternal. It had been fragile, hesitant, afraid. He remembered her saying, "I just don't think it's right. No, please, I don't want to sign anything else without." She had stopped abruptly when she saw him in the doorway. She had hung up the phone quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll talk later," she'd said. But they never did, because he hadn't pushed her, because he'd assumed it was just exhaustion, not manipulation. Now, reading the notebook, he could hear that whisper all over again. And this time, he knew who had been on the other end of the call. Victor Hale. Charlie closed the notebook for a moment, pressing it against his forehead as a wave of grief washed through him. Not the grief of losing his wife, but the grief of realizing she had suffered in silence. He opened it again and kept reading, flipping through pages filled with small, messy notations. On one page, Linda wrote that a piece of her jewelry, her grandmother's locket, had gone missing. She worried she misplaced it. On another, she mentioned documents she couldn't find. Insurance papers, medical statements, legal forms she never touched without Charlie. "Things keep disappearing," she had written. "I must be losing my mind." Charlie clenched the notebook. Linda had never lost things, not important things. Her memory had remained sharp even as her health deteriorated. She was imagining it. Someone had been taking advantage of her confusion, her kindness, her vulnerability. He set the notebook down on the bedspread, staring at it as if it were a living thing speaking truths too painful to bear. The pieces began arranging themselves in his mind with slow, deliberate clarity. The unexplained withdrawals, Victor's constant presence, the whispered phone call, the jewelry gone without explanation, the documents she no longer seemed to control. And Victor's carefully rehearsed sympathy at the funeral, his casual knowledge of estate matters, his sudden closeness to his wife in those final months. Grief began giving way to something colder, resolve. Charlie inhaled deeply, letting the anger settle, letting it sharpen instead of consume him. Speaking now, sharing what he suspected, would only ignite chaos. Jason would explode. Mara would panic. Victor would retreat, hiding whatever else he'd taken. No, silence was stronger. Silence gave him room to move. He picked up the notebook again and held it firmly in his hands. "I'm going to find the truth," he murmured, "on my terms." He closed the cover gently, as though closing the last intact piece of Linda he had left. Then he whispered into the quiet bedroom, "And until then, I stay silent." Outside, the wind rattled the windows again, soft, cold, almost expectant, as if it knew the truth was only beginning to surface. The afternoon sun slid low across the quiet Savannah street, painting long amber streaks across Charlie's porch. He'd spent most of the day rereading Linda's notebook, moving slowly through each entry until the pages felt carved into him. By late afternoon, he finally set the notebook aside and stepped into the kitchen for a cup of tea, something warm to hold, something familiar. He barely made it 2 steps before the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent chime. Charlie set the kettle down and wiped his palms on his jeans before opening the door. Victor Hale stood on the porch as if he belonged there. He held a glass casserole dish wrapped in foil, steam fogging the edges. His smile was soft, practiced, sympathetic in a way that made Charlie's stomach tighten. "Charlie," Victor said, the tone almost gentle, "I didn't want you spending the evening alone. Thought I'd bring something by, chicken and rice. Linda loved it." Charlie forced a nod. "That's kind of you," he said, though his voice carried none of the warmth the words suggested. Victor stepped forward slightly, offering the dish. Charlie didn't reach for it. "I appreciate the gesture," Charlie said, "but I've got plenty of food inside. Neighbors dropped off more than I can eat." Victor hesitated, just a flicker, a small tightening around his mouth before smiling again. "Of course, I just wanted to help." Charlie let the silence stretch. He watched Victor's posture, the way his eyes scanned the foyer behind him, lingering on the framed photos on the hall wall. Victor wasn't here to offer comfort. That much was clear. "Linda always said you shouldn't be alone too much after she was gone," Victor added casually, as if sharing a private memory. "She had a lot of wishes for how things should be handled." Charlie's pulse ticked sharply. Wishes? The word hung between them, heavier than any casserole dish. Linda had never spoken to Victor about handling anything, certainly not the estate. Yet Victor spoke with the ease of someone who believed he had a right to the information, or access to it. Charlie stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking Victor's view inside. "Funny," he murmured. "Linda didn't mention those conversations to me." Victor didn't miss the implication. His smile tightened again, though he tried to hide it behind a sympathetic tilt of his head. "She didn't want you overwhelmed. You had your hands full, traveling, working with the Historical Society. She told me she didn't want to burden you with paperwork." The words sank like cold stones in Charlie's stomach. Linda never saw him as someone to burden, and Victor knew details, specific ones, about Charlie's travel schedule and Linda's worries that he hadn't shared with anyone. The notebook's initials, the withdrawals, the whispered calls, they suddenly felt too close. Before Charlie could respond, a car pulled abruptly into the driveway. Gravel scattered under the tires as Jason climbed out, slamming the door behind him. His eyes darted between them, first at Charlie, then at Victor. "What's going on here?" Jason demanded. Victor straightened with visible relief, as if reinforcements had arrived. "Just checking on your father," he said smoothly, "making sure he's not alone." Jason shot Charlie a hard look. "You should let people help you instead of pushing them away. Victor's been more of a friend to Mom than you were lately." Charlie didn't respond. He knew any defense would only fuel Jason's anger, give Victor more room to maneuver. Instead, he stepped back, allowing Jason to stand closer to Victor, allowing the two to fact each other while he observed. Jason folded his arms, placing himself almost protectively beside Victor, as though Victor were the grieving spouse and Charlie merely an obstacle. Victor put a hand on Jason's shoulder in a gesture that was both reassuring and possessive. "Grief makes us isolate," Victor said, addressing Jason but glancing at Charlie. "Your mother told me she was worried he'd shut down." Jason shook his head, jaw tight. "He already has." The ache in Charlie's chest sharpened, but he stayed still. Words spoken now would only feed the wrong mouths. Victor offered one last sympathetic look, too polished, too deliberate. "I'll get out of your way. Jason, call me if you or your father need anything." Jason nodded sharply. Victor walked to his car, placing the untouched casserole on the passenger seat before driving away. Only when the engine faded down the street did Charlie step back into the house. Jason followed him to the doorway. "You should be grateful he's looking out for us," he snapped. "Mom trusted him." Charlie met his son's eyes but said nothing. Silence was safer. Silence was protective. Jason muttered something under his breath and stalked back to his car. When the front door finally shut and the house exhaled into stillness again, Charlie walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed his phone, and dialed a number he trusted far more than Jason. Samuel picked up on the second ring. "Charlie, everything all right?" Charlie's voice was low, steady. "Samuel," he said, "something's off." And as the wind pressed faintly against the kitchen windows, Charlie felt the first tremor of a truth that was still gathering force, waiting to break open. Samuel's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building overlooking the Savannah River. The place always smelled faintly of cedar and old legal files, a scent Charlie had grown to trust over the years. Today, though, the familiar warmth felt thin, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Samuel closed the door behind them and motioned for Charlie to sit. His expression was oddly tight, the kind he used only when he was about to say something no one wanted to hear. "I've gone through the estate documents again," Samuel began, choosing his words with deliberate care. "There's something you need to know." Charlie rested his palms on his knees, steadying himself. "Go on." Samuel slid a folder across the desk. Inside, highlighted in yellow, was a form Charlie recognized immediately, Linda's life insurance and estate allocation paperwork. But something was different, something he had never seen. "This amendment," Samuel said quietly, tapping the sheet, "was added a month before Linda passed." Charlie leaned in, his heartbeat slowed, heavy and deliberate. "An amendment to what?" "The secondary beneficiary." Samuel paused, and then with a level, regretful voice he added, "She named Victor Hale." It felt like the floor tilted. Charlie swallowed hard, but the room didn't stop spinning. The name echoed through his head, bumping against every page of Linda's notebook, every whispered phone call, every unexplained withdrawal. He stared at the form, at the neat cursive signature beside the amendment date. Linda's signature. Except not quite. His breath thinned. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "She never mentioned anything about changing beneficiaries. She wouldn't make decisions like this without talking to me." Samuel nodded. "I know, that's why I took a closer look." He pulled out another document, one of Linda's older forms, and placed it beside the new one. Side by side, the signatures looked nearly identical except for the smallest differences. The slant, the pressure, the uneven strokes. "It's close," Samuel said, "very close, but look at the tail on the L and the spacing between her first and last name. I can't say it's forged, not legally. It's good enough to pass at first glance, but it's off." Charlie stared at the signatures, his stomach tightening with each passing second. "You think Victor had something to do with this?" "I think," Samuel said carefully, "that this amendment benefited only one person, and that person happened to be around your wife far more than you knew." Charlie closed his eyes, the truth settling like wet cement around his ribs. Victor hadn't just inserted himself into Linda's life. He'd inserted himself into her death. Before Samuel could say more, the door behind them swung open. Jason stood in the doorway, face flushed, breathing quick. He'd clearly been listening long enough to catch the worst part. "You've got to be kidding me," Jason snapped. "Victor, beneficiary, is this what you're doing now, Dad? Blaming innocent people because you can't accept that Mom trusted someone else more than she trusted you?" Charlie didn't turn, he didn't argue. He didn't offer excuses or explanations. He simply breathed, slow and measured. Jason stepped into the room, pointing a finger at Charlie. "You're twisting this. You always twist things to make yourself look like the victim. Mom told Victor things because he was there for her. You were." Samuel stood. "Jason." "No," Jason lifted a hand sharply. "I'm tired of everyone babying him. Dad can't stand the idea that someone else did more for Mom in her last months than he did." The words cut, sharp and raw, but Charlie didn't let the pain show. He kept his eyes on the documents, on the shaky signature that was Linda's. Jason looked between the two men, frustration clouding every feature. "I can't do this," he muttered, shaking his head. "I won't listen to this garbage." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames on Samuel's shelves rattled. Silence fell heavily in his wake. Samuel exhaled. "I'm sorry he overheard that. He's grieving." Charlie finally lifted his eyes. "Grief doesn't change the truth." Samuel nodded. "What do you want to do next?" Charlie stared at the documents once more. Linda's true handwriting lived in hundreds of cards and notes at home, letters she wrote from a place of love and clarity. This version of her, the confused woman in the notebook, the forged signature, she had been cornered, manipulated, isolated. And Victor had woven himself into every thread. Charlie gently closed the folder. His voice was quiet but edged with steel. "I'm not ready to speak publicly, not about this, not yet." Samuel studied him. "You're going after the truth." Charlie looked toward the door Jason had slammed moments earlier. "I owe Linda that much, and I owe my children the truth, even if they don't want to hear it." He stood, gripping the folder as though it were a lifeline and a weapon. Inside, he made a silent vow, one that burned through every piece of doubt, every moment of hesitation. "I will uncover exactly how Victor manipulated my dying wife. And when the truth comes out, the silence he chose today would become the loudest sound Victor Hale ever heard." The news reached Charlie the next morning, arriving not through a formal letter or a respectful phone call, but through Mara, her voice shaky, her words tangled in disbelief. She stood on his porch clutching a stack of documents, her expression a mixture of guilt and grief. "Jason filed for early probate," she said quietly, handing him the papers. He's claiming you're unfit to manage Mom's estate." Charlie didn't speak. He simply stared at the bold text stamped across the top of the filing, the words "petition for early probate" staring back at him like an accusation carved in stone. "Unfit." He let the words sink in without flinching. Mara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. "Dad, I didn't want this. I tried to talk him out of it, but he says you're hiding things, that you're avoiding responsibility. And after what happened at the funeral," her voice trembled, I didn't know what to believe." Charlie didn't blame her. Grief could twist even the kindest hearts into shadows of themselves. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're hurting. Both of you are." But inside, a slow, steady ache tightened in his chest. Jason hadn't just doubted him, he declared war. By noon, after Mara left with apologies she repeated 3 times, Charlie drove downtown to the precinct. The missing items, Linda's locket, documents, personal papers, could no longer be dismissed as misplacement, and he needed someone outside the family to see the full picture. Detective Caroline Frost met him in a small interview room, her posture upright, her eyes sharp. She flipped through the inventory Charlie provided, nodding slowly as he listed the items gone missing over the past months. "You reported 1 or 2 things shortly after your wife passed," she said, tapping her pen. "But this is more." She glanced up at him. "Why now?" Charlie hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't want to assume or accuse the wrong person, but after going through Linda's notebook and after what my attorney found," he shifted the papers toward her, "I'm beginning to think none of this was accidental." Frost scanned the notebook entries, her brow tightening. Unexplained withdrawals, someone helping with finances, initials missing valuables. She sat back in her chair, folding her arms thoughtfully. "This is a pattern." "Of what?" Charlie asked. "Dependency." Frost's voice deepened. "Manipulation, gradual control. This is common in cases where an outsider gains the trust of someone vulnerable, especially someone ill." Charlie felt the weight of the words settle like lead. He didn't say Victor's name. Frost didn't need it yet. "We'll dig," she said, "but tread carefully. People who insert themselves like this often protect their position aggressively." He knew exactly what she meant. By late afternoon, the rumors had begun. They drifted through church circles, local diners, neighbors who whispered as Charlie walked past. He heard fragments, enough to know where they came from. Linda was lonely. He was gone a lot. She confided in Victor. Charlie shut her out emotionally. She didn't trust him near the end. Victor Hale's fingerprints were all over the whispers, as clear as if he'd signed them himself. Charlie didn't respond, not when Mrs. Halpern from across the street looked at him with a mixture of pity and judgment, not when members of Linda's prayer group avoided eye contact, not when two men at the hardware store fell silent the moment he walked in. The community was splitting, quietly, subtly, but he could feel it. Some believed him. Some believed Victor. And some believed whatever story made them feel least uncomfortable. Through all of it, Charlie stayed silent. He had learned something important in the past week. Truth needed room to grow. It needed patience. And noise, public fighting, shouting matches, desperate pleas only suffocated it. So he said nothing. He didn't refute the rumors. Didn't defend himself to Jason. Didn't correct the sideways glances from neighbors who once invited him to every barbecue. Instead, he gathered. Every missing item documented. Every notebook entry highlighted. Every inconsistent statement from Victor noted. Every memory of Linda's whispered call replayed until it sharpened into clarity. He collected truth like stones, small, dense, undeniable. And while the world painted him as detached, confused, or guilty, Charlie let them. He moved quietly through his days, steady and deliberate, knowing that silence could do what shouting never could. Silence let people reveal themselves. When evening fell and the last sliver of light slipped behind the trees, Charlie stood in the doorway of Linda's old study, holding her notebook in one hand and the probate petition in the other. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of both settle into him. Escalation had begun. Jason's petition. Victor's rumors. The community dividing. But the truth was gathering strength too. And Charlie, calm, patient, painfully observant, knew it was only a matter of time before the quiet he carried would become the storm they never saw coming. Detective Caroline Frost called Charlie early the next morning. Her voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Mr. Whitford," she said, "I managed to get access to your wife's medical records. I think you should come in." By the time Charlie arrived at the precinct, Frost had a thin stack of files waiting on the table. She closed the door behind him, sat across from him, and slid the first page forward. "These are notes from Linda's attending physician," she said. "Standard updates, but look here." She tapped a highlighted sentence near the bottom. "Patient reports increased stress from outside influence. Uncertain source. Emotional confusion noted." Charlie leaned in. His heart slowed, then quickened unevenly. "Outside influence," he repeated. Frost nodded. This wasn't related to her illness. Something, or someone, was affecting her emotionally. She flipped to the next page, and the timing is consistent with when her notebook entries became less coherent. Charlie swallowed hard. A faint ringing crept into his ears. Linda had been stressed, afraid, and she hadn't told him. Frost cleared her throat. "There's more. I spoke with one of the nurses who worked evening shifts during the last weeks of Linda's stay." Charlie straightened. "What did she say?" "She remembered your wife very well," Frost replied. "Said Linda always tried to be pleasant, even when she was clearly in pain." Frost hesitated, then continued. "But what caught her attention was the visitor log." She turned the file so Charlie could see the chart. The names were listed in neat columns, dates, times, initials. Victor Hale appeared nearly every single day. Sometimes twice. "She said Victor spent more time with your wife than most family members do," Frost said. "She assumed he was a close family friend." Charlie's breath caught. "Daily," he whispered. "I didn't know he was there that often. She never mentioned." A wave of guilt crashed into him, sharp and suffocating. How much had she been dealing with alone? How much had she tried to protect him from? Frost watched him closely. The nurse also said Linda often looked distressed after some of his visits. Shaken, uneasy. She folded her hands. She didn't document it officially because Linda didn't make a complaint, but she noticed. Charlie pressed his palms against the table to steady himself. His mind flickered with memories, the whispered phone call, the hesitations, the sudden reluctance Linda had shown when he'd brought up finances in those final weeks. Had she been trying to tell him something without burdening him? Had Victor pressured her when Charlie wasn't there? Frost opened the final folder. This part is where things become concerning from a legal standpoint. She slid forward a bank statement. One of your wife's accounts shows a large withdrawal made on a day Victor signed into the hospital visitor log. Charlie's stomach dropped the same day. Exactly the same. Frost met his eyes. $900 cash withdrawal. Linda was hospitalized, heavily medicated, and unable to drive. A slow, cold dread moved through Charlie's limbs. She couldn't have done that, he said quietly. She could barely hold a pen some days. Frost didn't answer. She didn't need to. Charlie leaned back, his chest tightening with a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. The pieces were no longer fragments. They were forming a damning picture. Victor hadn't just been visiting. He had been infiltrating, controlling, taking. And Linda, weakened and vulnerable, had tried in her own way to signal distress, leaving breadcrumbs in a notebook no one had thought to open soon enough. Charlie rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. Was she afraid? He muttered, barely audible. Was she trying to protect me, or was she trapped by him? Frost softened her voice. I'm not going to speculate, but I can tell you this. Nothing about his involvement looks casual. Before Charlie could respond, the door opened abruptly. Jason stood there, arms crossed, eyes blazing. I knew it, he snapped. I knew you were dragging the police into this. You just can't stop, can you? You can't stop blaming people. Charlie stiffened. Jason, this isn't about blame. Jason jabbed a finger toward the files. These papers don't prove anything. Victor cared about Mom. He visited because you did. You're twisting everything because you can't handle the fact that you weren't there enough. Jason, Frost said evenly, we're following evidence. Jason ignored her. Dad is using you to push a narrative. He's obsessed with making Victor the villain. It's pathetic. Charlie said nothing. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue, didn't explain. The entries in Linda's handwriting, or the nurse's observations, or the withdrawal on the exact day Victor visited. His silence infuriated Jason. See, you can't even speak. You never can, you just hide. Jason stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Frost exhaled, turning back to Charlie. I'm sorry you're dealing with that on top of everything else. Charlie looked down at the file again. His voice was low, steady, almost cold. I'm not fighting him, not yet. He closed the folder slowly, carefully. Silence protects you sometimes, he said. Sometimes it isolates you. He met Frost's eyes. And sometimes, he added, it keeps the enemy from knowing you can see every move they're making. He stood, gripping Linda's notebook under his arm. Silence is my weapon, he said quietly, and right now it's the only shield I have. The precinct hallway hummed faintly as he walked out, the truth gathering behind him like a storm he was preparing to unleash. Victor arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when the air in Savannah felt still enough to hear your own heartbeat. Charlie was sweeping the front porch when he saw Victor's silver sedan pull into the driveway with the smooth confidence of someone who believed he was welcome anywhere. Victor stepped out with that same polished smile, adjusting the cuff of his tailored shirt as though preparing for a performance. Charlie, he called out warmly, thought I'd stop by and check in. You've been awfully quiet. Charlie rested the broom against the railing. I've had things to think about. Victor walked up the porch steps, leaning casually against the wooden post. Linda would have wanted people around you. She worried about you, you know, especially after that last cardiology appointment. Charlie's eyes sharpened. He hadn't mentioned that appointment to anyone. Linda's cardiology follow-up had been private. Only he and Linda knew when it happened and what the doctor said. Victor shouldn't have known anything about it. Victor realized he'd misstepped a second too late. His smile froze, then returned too quickly. I mean, in general, her heart issues, you know. We talked about her health a lot. Charlie didn't move. He didn't question him. The silence alone made Victor shift, his weight bouncing from one foot to the other. There it was. Overconfidence. The first crack. Linda and I talked about everything, Victor added, trying to smooth over the stumble. She trusted me. Charlie gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. But inside, a cold, steady certainty tightened in his chest. Victor wasn't just slipping. He was revealing threads of knowledge only someone intimately entangled in Linda's life would possess. And Charlie stored that detail away like a sharpened blade. That evening, Detective Frost called him with new findings. Her tone was clipped, efficient, but edged with something like disbelief. We ran a background check on Victor Hale, she said. His history isn't clean. Charlie straightened in his chair. Go on. He has a pattern, Frost continued. He befriends older women, widows, women with savings or property. He volunteers at churches, retirement homes, community groups. Always positions himself as helpful, trustworthy. A slow chill spread across Charlie's skin. Nothing directly criminal yet, Frost added, but several women he was close with experienced sudden financial issues. Withdrawals, lost documents, unusual charges, nothing conclusive but unmistakable in hindsight. Charlie felt the room close in slightly. And the church? He asked quietly. That's the other thing, Frost said. We found inconsistencies in multiple accounts he handled as treasurer. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers, all disguised as routine maintenance expenses. Charlie exhaled slowly, the truth assembling itself like bones knitting together. Victor's charm wasn't accidental. It was strategy. Later that night, Jason barged into Charlie's living room without knocking, his stance militant, his face set in stubborn anger. I heard Frost called you again, he said. Are you still trying to drag Victor through the mud? Haven't you done enough? Charlie didn't respond. He sat on the sofa, calm, composed, his silence only irritating Jason further. Victor's been nothing but supportive, Jason insisted. He told me you're twisting everything, and honestly, I believe him. At least he actually cared about Mom when she needed someone, unlike you. Charlie's jaw tightened a fraction, but he didn't rise to it. Jason wanted a fight. Silence denied him one. You're obsessed, Jason said angrily. You're building a conspiracy out of grief. Mom wouldn't want this. Still, Charlie remained silent. Frustrated, Jason stormed out, muttering accusations that echoed down the hallway long after he was gone. Hours later, as dusk settled over the old neighborhood and cicadas buzzed in the trees outside, Mara knocked softly on the door. She slipped inside, hesitant, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Dad, can we talk? Charlie motioned for her to sit. She did, folding her hands tightly in her lap. I think Jason is wrong, she whispered. I don't know what's happening, but Victor, something about him doesn't feel right anymore, and I hate that I didn't see it sooner. Charlie studied her quietly. She looked smaller than usual, weighed down by the pressure of choosing between truth and loyalty. You're not wrong for wanting to believe the best in people, Charlie said gently. Mara's eyes watered. But you're not telling me everything. I can feel it. There's more, isn't there? Charlie held her gaze for a long moment, then reached for Linda's notebook. He opened it, not to the most damning pages, but to the earlier ones. The small signs, the confusion, the stress. He let Mara read just enough or her breath to hitch. I didn't want to overwhelm you, Charlie said quietly. Or Jason. But Victor, Mara whispered, voice cracking. Charlie closed the notebook softly. There are things I still need to confirm, things that will hurt before they heal. She wiped her cheeks, nodding slowly. Just promise me you'll tell me the truth when you're ready. I will, Charlie said. And as she squeezed his hand, he felt the first shift, the first sign that not everyone had been permanently swayed by Victor's charm. But he still wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not until the truth became undeniable. Not until silence finished its work. Samuel's office felt different this time, charged, tense, as if the very air knew what was coming. Papers were spread across the desk, legal codes highlighted, forms arranged in deliberate stacks. Samuel adjusted his glasses, his voice steady with purpose. "Charlie," he said, tapping a document, "I've drafted a petition to freeze all estate assets until the investigation is complete. With the suspicious withdrawals, the questionable signatures, and Frost's report, we have grounds." Charlie nodded slowly. "Do it." Samuel looked up at him. "This is a countermove, Charlie. Once I file this, Victor will know you're not sitting still anymore. And your son. I know. Jason will see this as an attack." Charlie breathed in deeply, the kind of breath a man takes before stepping into a storm. Freeze everything. It's the only way to protect what Linda left behind. Samuel signed the final page with swift strokes and pushed the stack toward Charlie. "Then let's begin." By late afternoon, the legal freeze had hit the system like a quiet lightning bolt, and Jason found out almost immediately. He came barreling into Charlie's house without warning, rage boiling off him in waves. "How could you do this?" he shouted, waving the notice. "How could you freeze Mom's accounts, her assets, everything she worked for?" Charlie stood in the living room, posture calm, voice level. "It's temporary, until we have answers." "Answers?" Jason barked out a furious laugh. "You're stealing Mom's legacy and calling it protection." Charlie didn't respond. He let Jason's anger echo through the room, let the accusation settle without resistance. His silence only made Jason more furious. "You're hiding behind lawyers," Jason snapped. "Behind Frost, behind these stupid theories. You're destroying everything because you can't accept that Mom trusted Victor more than you." Charlie's heart squeezed, but he stayed still. He knew anything he said would only deepen the wound. Jason slammed the door on his way out, leaving the house trembling in his wake. Charlie exhaled slowly, his hands tightening at his sides. Storm number 1 had arrived. Storm number 2 came shortly after sunset. Victor showed up unannounced, standing on Charlie's porch with the smug confidence of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. The streetlights cast long shadows across his face, sharpening the angles of his expression. "You've made a very foolish decision," Victor said without greeting. Charlie leaned against the doorframe. "Is that so?" Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Freezing the assets, that hurts Jason, it hurts Mara, it hurts the entire family. And for what? Your paranoia." Charlie didn't blink. Victor smiled with cold amusement. "You think poking around in old papers and having your pet detective dig through accounts is going to get you anywhere. You're grasping at shadows, Charlie." Charlie watched him, noting every flicker of expression. The tightening around the eyes, the small twitch in his jaw, the way he shifted his weight as though preparing for a fight. Victor lowered his voice even further. "End this now and I'll forget your little stunt. Keep going and I promise you'll regret it." Charlie spoke for the first time. "You done?" Victor straightened, surprised by the calm response. "This isn't a game." "No," Charlie said, stepping just slightly forward. "It is." Victor stared at him for a long moment, waiting for fear, for anger, for anything he could use. But Charlie remained calm, unshaken, grounded, unreadable. Victor finally turned away, frustration crackling through his movements as he walked back to his car. Storm number 2 had passed, but it had left a mark. Inside, Charlie went straight to his desk. He opened a fresh legal pad and began writing, not with haste but with methodical precision. He documented everything: the notebook entries, the medical records, the nurse's observations, the financial withdrawals, the forged signature, Victor's slip about the cardiology appointment. He wrote until the page was full, then started another, and another. By the time he finished, his hand trembled slightly from the weight of it all. This statement would be the backbone of whatever came next, his counterstrike, his proof, his truth. And then came a knock, soft, fragile. Myra stood in the doorway, eyes swole, and cheeks streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She stepped inside hesitantly. "Dad, I don't know what to do anymore." Charlie set his pen down gently. "Come here." She sat across from him, twisting her hands repeatedly. "Jason says you're tearing the family apart. Victor says you're spiraling. Everyone's talking, and I don't know what's real anymore." Charlie studied her face, Linda's eyes, his mother's gentleness. "What do you feel?" Myra swallowed hard. "I feel like something is wrong, but I don't want to doubt my own brother or doubt Mom's choices, and I hate that I'm caught in the middle." Charlie reached across the table and took her hand softly. "You're not in the middle, sweetheart. You're just searching for the truth." More tears fell. "Dad, is this all really happening?" Charlie held her hand firmly. "Yes." She nodded, breathing shakily. "Then tell me what I need to do." Charlie squeezed her hand once before letting go. His voice was gentle, steady. "You don't need to fight for me. You don't need to fight Jason. The truth," he tapped the stack of written pages, "the truth will speak for me." Mara wiped her eyes and exhaled, as though those words gave her a place to finally rest. Outside, the night deepened, quiet but charged, because everyone had made their move. And now Charlie had made his. The courthouse in downtown Savannah carried the old weight of a place where lives had been rebuilt and dismantled for over a century. Sunlight filtered through tall, arched windows, cutting pale slices across the polished wooden benches. Charlie took a seat beside Samuel at the petitioner's table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. It was the day everything would be dragged into the open, whether he spoke or not. Judge Morales entered with the firm presence of someone who had no interest in theatrics. "This is the probate challenge for the estate of Linda Whitford," she announced. "We will hear testimony from both sides." Jason was called first. He walked up stiffly, shoulders high, jaw clenched. When he sat down, he didn't look at Charlie, not once. "Mr. Jason Whitford," the court clerk said, "state your relationship to the deceased." "I'm her son," Jason replied, voice already trembling. "Her oldest." Samuel glanced at Charlie, but Charlie kept his eyes forward. The questioning began. Jason spoke with rising emotion, every sentence saturated with frustration and grief. "Mom went downhill fast," he said. "She needed support, someone to be with her every day, someone who cared, but Dad," he swallowed hard. "Dad was distant, distracted. He wasn't there like she needed." Judge Morales nodded sympathetically. "Can you elaborate?" Jason's voice cracked. "She told me she felt alone, that she wished Dad listened more. Victor was there for her. Victor supported her. Dad didn't. And now he's attacking the only person who cared about her when she was dying." The words landed heavily in the courtroom. A few people shifted in their seats. Charlie didn't flinch. Jason pressed on, tears threatening but not falling. "Dad's trying to freeze everything she earned, everything she wanted for us. He's twisting things. He's creating drama where there wasn't any." Charlie listened to every word, every misplaced accusation, every wound spoken like truth. But he made no attempt to defend himself. When Jason stepped down, he wiped his eyes quickly, shooting a glance at Victor, seeking reassurance, approval, something to anchor the storm inside him. Victor nodded back, calm, controlled, smug. Then he rose for his own testimony. He walked to the witness chair with the confidence of a man long accustomed to being trusted. "My name is Victor Hale," he said smoothly. I was a close friend to Linda, a companion in her last months. He spoke of Linda with gentle affection, pausing at all the right places, lowering his voice to sound reverent. She confided in me, he said. She worried that Charlie was pulling away. She wanted someone to talk to, someone who could help her manage things. He folded his hands. She trusted me with her fears. Samuel's jaw tightened. Charlie didn't move. Victor continued, layering himself in false humility. I did not seek anything from her. I was simply there because she needed someone present, someone who cared unconditionally. He glanced sideways at Charlie. Not everyone can offer that, not even family. Jason stared down at the table, swallowing guilt, grief, and loyalty all at once. Victor looked back at the judge with earnest, polished sincerity. I never asked Linda for anything. Not money, not recognition, nothing. The idea that I manipulated her is heartbreaking. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the courtroom. Judge Morales nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Hale. We will now review the evidence submitted. Detective Frost stood from the back row. Victor's expression changed just slightly, a flicker of discomfort. Your Honor, Frost said, stepping forward with a fill. In hand, the Savannah Police Department has obtained financial surveillance footage relevant to this case. Victor's jaw tightened. The judge gestured for her to proceed. Frost placed a USB drive into the court monitor. This footage was recorded at Lakewood Bank. The day marked on the screen corresponds to a hospital timestamp showing that Mrs. Whitford was unconscious due to heavy sedation. She pressed play. The courtroom leaned forward as grainy footage lit up the screen. A man in a dark jacket, a baseball cap, head lowered. He approached the counter, slid paperwork across the desk, and withdrew money from Linda Whitford's account. Frost stepped closer to the monitor. Please pay attention to the moment he lifts his head. The man glanced briefly toward the camera. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was Victor. Clear as sunlight. The same jawline, the same posture, the same eyes now widening in the courtroom. Jason's face drained of all color. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. This isn't, he stuttered, his polished confidence crumbling in real time. This isn't what it looks like. Linda asked me to. But no one believed him, not anymore. Judge Morales folded her hands slowly. Mr. Hale, she said, voice cold and controlled, you stated under oath that you never accessed the deceased's accounts, yet this footage, recorded while she was incapacitated, shows you withdrawing her money. Victor's lips trembled. I can explain. But every word fell flat, hollow, exposed. Jason stared at him in stunned betrayal. Whatever loyalty he once felt shattered like glass against stone. Frost stepped back, arms crossed. This is only part of the evidence, Your Honor. Victor sank into his chair, hands shaking. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, shock radiating through every row. And Charlie. He sat still, silent, eyes fixed forward, face unreadable, heart steady. He didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for him. And its voice was finally louder than the lies that had shadowed him for months. The courtroom hadn't fully settled after the shocking footage when Detective Frost stepped forward again, one more file in her hand. Her expression was different now, more certain, more resolute. She addressed Judge Morales with a steady voice. Your Honor, beyond the surveillance footage, our investigation uncovered additional evidence regarding Mr. Hale's interactions with Mrs. Whitford during her final months. Victor stiffened visibly. Frost continued. Specifically, we have statements from hospital staff indicating that Mr. Hale frequently brought documents to Mrs. Whitford for signing. Documents she appeared hesitant to go over without her husband, but Mr. Hale insisted were urgent. Jason's head jerked up. Charlie didn't move. The staff noted, Frost said, flipping through her notes, that Mr. Hale often coached her through the signatures. Some even recalled him placing his hand over hers to steady her grip. In 2 instances, Linda expressed confusion about what she was signing. A heavy silence fell over the room. Victor's face drained of color. "She asked me for help," he stammered. "She was overwhelmed, she wanted guidance." Frost didn't blink, but she also reported stress from an outsider influence. And the handwriting on the beneficiary change does not match her own baseline samples. Mara gasped softly. She turned to Charlie, tears filling her eyes as realization crashed into her. "Dad, she was scared, and we didn't see it." Her voice cracked, raw and remorseful. Charlie finally looked at her. Just a small shift of his head, but it was enough. Mara broke. She crossed the aisle and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over. "I believed the wrong people. I didn't listen. I didn't listen to you." Charlie held her, gentle but steady. His silence was not cold, it was grounding. A quiet acknowledgement that she wasn't too late. That truth had a way of finding its way home. But Jason couldn't accept what he was seeing. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape that echoed off the courtroom walls. "No," he said, voice shaking. "This is manipulation. This is all twisted. Victor wouldn't do that. Mom trusted him. She trusted him more than—" His voice broke. Judge Morales raised a calming hand. "Mr. Whitford, please compose yourself." Jason shook his head violently. "They're lying. They're setting him up to protect Dad. This whole thing is—" "Jason," Mara said, turning toward him through her tears, "you saw the footage. You heard the nurse. You heard Frost. He coached Mom. He took her money." Jason stared at her as if she'd stabbed him. "You're choosing him, after everything." "I'm choosing the truth," Mara whispered. Jason opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. His face twisted, hurt, denial, panic. And then he stormed out of the courtroom, slamming the doors behind him so hard they rattled in their frames. Victor watched the exit with desperation, then turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I had no idea she wasn't well enough to understand those papers. She insisted on updating her accounts. She wanted to help her children. I was only—" "Helping?" Samuel cut in, standing with slow deliberation. "By forging her signature, by withdrawing money while she was unconscious, by visiting her daily with documents she didn't understand." Victor's mouth hung open, but no defense came. Samuel walked toward the judge's bench with a new stack of files. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I move to invalidate all documents naming Mr. Hale as beneficiary on the grounds of coercion, manipulation, and suspected fraud." Judge Morales accepted the folders, scanning the top pages. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't rule yet, but the direction of the wind was unmistakable. Then from the back row, someone stood. A gray-haired man in a worn suit, one of the elders from Linda's church. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. "Your Honor, I have something to add." The judge nodded. "Come forward." He stepped to the front, wringing his hat between his fingers. "A few weeks after Linda passed, Victor was talking with some of us outside the fellowship hall. He said—" The man hesitated, swallowing hard. "He said losing Linda was sad, yes, but that her passing opened new opportunities for him." A horrified murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victor's eyes widened. "I never said that. He's misremembering." The man looked at him with sorrow. "Son, you said it with a smile." Victor's shoulders sagged. Whatever mask he'd been wearing was now slipping piece by piece, revealing panic underneath. His hands trembled as he reached for his tie, loosening it as though the room had suddenly lost all its oxygen. Judge Morales set the witness statement down, her expression firm. "Mr. Hale, the evidence presented paints a deeply troubling picture." Victor's lips parted, but no excuses came. Samuel returned to his table, placing his hand on Charlie's shoulder for a brief moment, a gesture of affirmation. "And Charlie," He sat quietly, watching the unraveling without triumph or anger. His silence had never been weakness. It had been strategy, shield, strength. Now, finally, it had become power. The room buzzed, witnesses whispering, jaws clenched, hearts pounding. The storm he had weathered in silence was breaking in public. And the truth was now loud enough for everyone to hear. Charlie had barely stepped through his front door when the pounding began, sharp, frantic blows shaking the old wooden frame. Before he could even reach for the knob, the door flew inward, and Jason stormed inside like a man driven by fire. "You ruined everything," Jason shouted, chest heaving, eyes wild with a grief that had curdled into fury. "Do you even understand what you did in that courtroom?" Charlie closed the door quietly behind him. "Jason." "Don't Jason me," he snapped, stepping closer until they were only a foot apart. "Victor was helping us. He was helping Mom. He was helping all of us. And you," his voice cracked, "you destroyed him. You humiliated him. You made a circus out of Mom's death." Charlie let the words settle, let the storm blow its hottest winds. He had endured worse in the past weeks, worse in the past months. But today, something in him shifted. Enough had been swallowed. Enough had been held back. He looked at his son with a steadiness that made Jason falter for half a second. "I didn't betray your mother," Charlie said, voice low but firm. "But someone did." Jason froze. His throat worked as if he were swallowing stones. "Don't say that. Don't say it like you know anything. Mom told me things. She trusted me." Charlie's gaze softened, not with pity but with understanding that didn't erase truth. "And you think she didn't trust me?" Jason broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. But his shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with a raw, exposed pain Charlie hadn't seen in years. "She loved Mara more," Jason whispered. "She always did." He pressed his palms to his temples. "I tried so hard, I called her every day, I showed up more. But she always looked at Mara like she was the one who mattered. Victor understood. He listened. He didn't make me feel like a failure." Charlie inhaled slowly, letting the ache settle deep in the room. "Jason," he said gently, "your mother loved you. She loved both of you. But pain doesn't justify blindness, or the choices you made these last few weeks." Jason flinched. "So now I'm the bad guy." "You're my son," Charlie said softly. "But I won't excuse what you've done, not the accusations, not the way you let Victor poison your grief." Jason's jaw tightened. He turned away, pacing, dragging his hand through his hair. "I can't be here," he muttered. "Not with you blaming everyone but yourself." He walked to the door, hesitated, then spun back around with one final desperate glare. "When this all blows up and Eichter sues you for defamation, or worse, you'll remember this. You'll remember I tried to warn you." Then he slammed the door and disappeared into the night. Silence followed him, deep and heavy. Moments later, Charlie's phone buzzed. He answered without checking the caller ID. Detective Frost's voice came through, steady but edged with concern. "Mr. Whitford, I wanted to give you a heads up. Victor's bail hearing is tomorrow morning. He's angry. He's not used to losing control, and people like him can lash out." Charlie tightened his grip on the phone. "I'm aware." "If anything feels off," Frost continued, "anything at all, call me. Don't handle this alone." "I won't," Charlie said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. After the call ended, Charlie stood in the quiet house, letting his breath return to an even rhythm. He walked into the living room and reached for Linda's notebook on the table. The worn edges, the ink-smudged pages, they felt like a pulse in his hands. A soft knock sounded behind him. This one wasn't angry or frantic. It was hesitant, fragile. Mara stepped inside when he opened the door, clutching a small overnight bag. "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "Detective Frost called me too. She thinks Victor might try something." Charlie nodded. "I figured." Mara stepped closer. "I don't want you alone tonight." He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the remnants of grief mixing with fear. She set her bag down beside the couch. "I'll stay here," she said softly, "just until things settle." Charlie didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded once and locked the door behind her. The house felt different now, two hearts beating cautiously instead of one. But beneath that, something darker stirred in the quiet corners, a sense that the storm wasn't over. It was gathering strength. Victor was cornered. Jason was fractured. The truth was rising. And somewhere in the space between them, a clash was building, quietly, relentlessly, waiting for the moment when everything would finally collide. The next morning broke with an eerie calm, a thin layer of fog rolling across Savannah, muffling the world into a soft gray hush. Charlie sat at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, Mara asleep in the guest room upstairs. It was the first truly quiet moment he'd had in weeks. But quiet never lasted long around the truth. At 9:17 a.m., Charlie's phone buzzed. Detective Frost's name flashed on the screen. "He's at the bank," she said without greeting. Her voice was clipped, urgent. "Victor is trying to access the last joint account your wife held, the one we placed under scrutiny." Charlie closed his eyes briefly. "You're sure?" "Positive, stay home. I'm on my way there now." She hung up before he could respond. Charlie set the phone down and exhaled. Linda's notebook lay open beside him, her handwriting a bittersweet anchor. He touched one of the entries lightly with his thumb. Victor was desperate. Cornered animals always were. At the bank downtown, the tension was nothing short of electric. Victor strode through the glass doors wearing the same overconfident mask he'd worn since the day Charlie first met him. He greeted the teller with a smile too bright, too familiar. "I'm here to access the Whitford joint account," he said smoothly. "My late friend entrusted me with helping finalize some things." The teller typed politely, unaware of the storm brewing behind those rehearsed words. "One moment, sir." Victor leaned in, projecting charm. But as the teller's eyes widened slightly, confused, then alert, Victor's smile wavered. "Is there a problem?" I need to verify something," she said. Before he could react, the bank doors opened again with authority. Detective Frost entered, badge raised. "Victor Hale," she said, voice echoing across the quiet lobby, "step away from the counter." Victor stiffened. "Detective, this is unnecessary. I was just attempting to withdraw funds from an account flagged for fraud investigation." Frost approached him steadily. "Hands where I can see them." A few customers gasped. A guard moved closer. Victor's composure cracked. "You don't understand," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "I'm resolving unfinished business." Frost's gaze hardened. "Your unfinished business looks a lot like theft." She cuffed him before he could bolt. The sound of metal locking around his wrists echoed like final judgment. And standing near the ATM line, arms folded, disbelief hollowing out his expression, was Jason. He hadn't expected to see Victor there. He certainly hadn't expected to see him arrested. "Victor," Jason whispered, stepping closer. What are you doing?" Victor turned, eyes pleading but failing to find solid ground. "Jason, this is a misunderstanding. They're twisting everything." Frost cut in. "No twisting. Surveillance caught him, bank logs caught him, your mother's notebook caught him, and now this." She gestured toward the teller, who held up the flagged account slip with Victor's signature. Jason's face blanched. "You told me you were helping her. You said she trusted you." Victor swallowed, sweating. "She did, I was." But the words collapsed. Everything collapsed. Jason stumbled back as if physically struck. For the first time, he saw Victor without the charm, without the borrowed halo of sincerity. He saw him for what he was. And his world cracked. Later at the precinct, Frost sat across from Charlie with a folder thicker than before. "We dug deeper," she said, sliding it toward him. Victor has priors, not convictions. He's careful, but patterns. He has a history in 3 states of befriending older women, ingratiating himself, then gradually isolating them. She opened the file. Financial exploitation, unexplained withdrawals, altered documents, same behavior, different names. Charlie looked down at the papers without blinking. He did this to others. Yes, Frost's voice softened. But Linda was his biggest opportunity. Her illness, her vulnerability, he used everything to his advantage. Charlie reached into his coat pocket and set Linda's notebook on the table. Then use this too. Frost opened it slowly, reverently. This is more than a diary, she said. This is testimony. Handwriting analysts reviewed every questionable signature Victor had presented. Linda's baseline samples were compared. The forged slants, the unnatural pressure, the stylistic inconsistencies, they formed a silent confession. All signatures naming Victor as beneficiary, Frost said, are confirmed forged. A quiet satisfaction settled in Charlie's chest, not triumph, not vengeance, just truth finally standing where lies once lived. Hours later, Jason arrived at the precinct. His eyes were red, his posture unsteady. He didn't speak when he saw Charlie. He didn't yell. He simply sank into a chair, staring at the floor. His beliefs had cracked wide open. But healing was Charlie's task, not now. There would be time for reckoning later. Because today wasn't about emotion. Today was about clarity. As Charlie walked out of the precinct and into the cool savannah air, he felt the shift as clearly as the change in seasons. The clash phase, weeks of tension, confrontation, and quiet storms, was ending. And now came the part Victor never saw coming. Revenge wasn't rage. Revenge was truth sharpening into consequence. And Charlie was ready for what came next. The courtroom was colder than us. Yule the next morning, the kind of chill that seeped into the walls when truth was about to surface. Victor sat at the defendant's table, hands cuffed, hair unkempt. The confidence he once carried now drained into a hollow, twitching nervousness. His lawyer whispered urgently, but Victor barely heard him. His foot tapped relentlessly, eyes darting to every corner of the room. Charlie entered quietly with Samuel beside him, Mara just behind. Jason came last, shoulders heavy, avoiding everyone's eyes. Frost sat near the front, files stacked neatly beside her, gaze fixed on Victor like she was waiting for a clock to strike. Judge Morales took her seat. "We are reconvening," she said. "Mr. Hale, the evidence presented is extensive. Before I make any preliminary rulings, you may speak if you wish." Victor swallowed. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm in warning, but Victor shrugged him off. Something inside him had cracked overnight, fear, guilt, inevitability. Whatever it was, it pushed him to his feet. "I want to say something," he muttered. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Victor's voice trembled at first, then steadied with a sickening clarity. "I targeted Linda Whitford." Jason's head snapped up. Mara gasped. Frost didn't move. Victor swallowed again, eyes darting toward Charlie, looking for anger, for hatred, for some explosive reaction he could latch onto. But Charlie remained perfectly still, silent, watching. "I met her at church," Victor continued. "She was kind, too kind. The type of person who apologizes when she's the one being inconvenienced. And she was lonely, vulnerable. I knew what that meant." Jason gripped the edge of the pew so tightly his knuckles went white. Victor's confession poured out like a dam finally breaking. "I knew her illness made her rely on others. I used that. I told her Charlie was overwhelmed, that she shouldn't bother him with details. I made her feel guilty for asking him for help, and when he traveled for work, I stepped in. I made sure I was the one she leaned on." Mara covered her mouth, tears spilling. Victor kept going, eyes glassy, voice distant. "I flattered her, told her she was strong, told her I understood her better than anyone. She needed reassurance and I gave it, because that made her trust me." He stared at the table. "I coached her. Sometimes I had to tell her which lines to sign. Sometimes I had to hold her hand to guide the pen. She didn't always understand what she was signing, but she trusted me." Jason let out a broken sound, half gasp, half sob. He pressed his face into his hands. Victor's voice cracked. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could get away with it." The judge leaned back slowly, sorrow and disapproval etched across her face. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, though her voice carried no softness. "Your actions were predatory, calculated, cruel." She turned to Charlie. "Mr. Whitford, your composure throughout this process, despite immense personal pain, has been remarkable. Few individuals could exhibit such restraint." Charlie bowed his head slightly, accepting the words without pride. He hadn't been strong for praise. He'd been strong for Linda. Judge Morales lifted the final ruling documents. "Based on the evidence, and Mr. Hale's own confession, every document naming Victor Hale as beneficiary is hereby invalidated. Linda Whitford's estate is fully restored to her legal family, her husband, Charles Whitford, and her children, Jason and Mara." Relief washed across the room, raw, trembling, overdue. Charlie closed his eyes briefly, not to savor victory, but to release the weight he'd carried alone for far too long. Jason stood slowly, eyes red, face streaked with grief and humiliation. He walked toward Charlie, each step hesitant, fragile. When he stopped in front of him, his voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, how did you know? How did you stay so calm? When I accused you, when everyone doubted you, how did you not break?" Charlie opened his eyes. For the first time since Linda's death, he spoke more than a guarded sentence. His voice was steady, gentle, but filled with a depth Jason hadn't heard from him in years. "Because your mother trusted me to protect her," Charlie said. "Even when she couldn't say the words, even when no one else believed me, she trusted me, and I wasn't going to fail her." Jason's breath hitched. A sob escaped him, quiet, broken, raw. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against Charlie's shoulder like he had as a child after waking from nightmares. Charlie placed a steady hand on his son's back. No gloating. No triumph. Just a quiet, painful reconciliation beginning to form. Across the courtroom, Victor lowered his head into shaking hands. Frost gathered the remaining evidence with calm precision. Judge Morales called for recess. But even as the room began to empty, the air felt charged, heavy with the aftermath of truth finally revealed. The confession had changed everything. Yet the road ahead, rebuilding, forgiving, healing, was only beginning. The courthouse felt heavier than usual that morning, as if the walls themselves anticipated the final blow. People filled the benches, church members, neighbors, reporters who had caught wind of the growing scandal. The air buzzed with whispers, tension, and brittle anticipation. Charlie entered quietly, Samuel at his side, Mara following close behind. Jason lingered a few steps back, head bowed, hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. Though the storm had begun to settle, guilt clung to him like a shadow. Victor was escorted in moments later, shackled, disheveled. The transformation from polished caretaker to exposed predator was nearly unrecognizable, but his eyes, darting, calculating, were exactly the same. Judge Morales took her seat. "This court convenes for the sentencing of Mr. Victor Hale," she said. "Before sentencing, the defendant has requested to make a statement." Murmurs rippled across the room. Victor rose slowly. His hands trembled against the table. For the first time, he didn't try to appear noble or misunderstood. He looked cornered, desperate. "Your Honor," he began, voice hoarse, I want to tell the truth, the full truth." Charlie watched him closely. Victor swallowed hard. "I didn't act alone." Gasps shot through the courtroom. Even Judge Morales leaned slightly forward. Victor continued, words spilling out faster now that the dam had cracked. "There was someone else, Someone at the church, someone who helped me access certain accounts, told me which members lived alone, who was struggling, who had savings. I couldn't have done everything by myself. Charlie's breath stilled. The church treasurer, Victor said. Eldon Brewer, he opened doors for me, kept records quiet, helped me approach the right people, and he took a cut. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, voices rising in shock. Several church members stood abruptly, hands covering their mouths. A woman burst into tears. Another shook her head violently, muttering, "No, no, he baptized my grandson. He couldn't." Judge Morales slammed her gavel. "Order in the court, order." But the room was already tearing at the seams. Frost exchanged a look with another officer and signaled them to step out, likely to find Eldon before he disappeared. Victor kept speaking, almost frantically now. There were others too, people who looked the other way, people who benefited. I wasn't the only one manipulating donations or accessing accounts. I'm not saying this to avoid punishment. I just need someone to know I wasn't acting alone. His voice broke. For a long moment, the courtroom sank into stunned silence. Charlie felt something cold settle in his chest. Linda had not been the first victim. Victor had honed his cruelty long before meeting her, on other vulnerable people, other families. She had been part of a pattern so much larger and darker than he had imagined. Judge Morales exhaled deeply. "This information will be investigated thoroughly, but today, Mr. Hale, we are here to sentence you." Victor lowered his head. The judge continued, voice firm and resonant. "For multiple counts of financial exploitation, forgery, coercion, and fraudulent manipulation of a vulnerable adult, this court sentences you to 28 years in state prison." Another wave of murmurs surged through the room, some relieved, some horrified. Victor didn't speak. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of his own actions had finally crushed whatever remained of his pride. As officers prepared to escort him away, Jason stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room turned toward him. He faced Charlie, eyes red, face trembling, voice raw. "Dad," he said, loud enough for the entire court to hear, "I'm sorry." The words, long overdue, echoed across the chamber. "I was wrong," Jason continued. "I believed a stranger over my own father. I hurt you. I hurt Mom's memory, and I'll live with that, but I want you to know I see it now, all of it." Charlie's jaw tightened, not in anger but in quiet, restrained grief. He gave Jason a slow nod, nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just an acknowledgement that forgiveness, when it came, would be real. Mara stepped forward and wrapped an arm around Charlie's. She lifted her chin toward the judge, toward the crowd, toward anyone watching. "My father protected my mother," she said firmly. "He honored her even when we doubted him. I'm proud of him." Charlie's eyes softened, but he said nothing. His silence had always carried more weight than words. Victor was led out through the back doors, shackles clinking. A handful of church members whispered prayers, others wept. The shock of corruption spreading through their community would take months to settle. Judge Morales closed the session with a solemn finality. "This court is adjourned." As the gavel struck, Charlie rose slowly. He held himself with a quiet dignity, no triumph, no vengeance in his exper. Justice had been done, and with it came a stillness he hadn't felt since before Linda grew ill. Outside the courthouse, warm sunlight washed across the steps. Samuel shook Charlie's hand. Frost offered a respectful nod. Mara squeezed his arm. Jason approached last, hesitant, humble. "Dad, can I walk with you?" Charlie nodded. The four of them descended the courthouse steps together. Behind them, Victor's lies lay fully dismantled. Ahead of them, the long path toward healing stretched open. And beneath Charlie's measured footsteps was a truth no one could deny. His silence had not been weakness. It had been the blade he carried quietly, until the moment justice demanded it. The first warm day of early spring arrived quietly, slipping into Savannah without fanfare. Sunlight filtered through the old oaks outside Charlie's home, casting dappled shadows across the backyard, shadows that had once frightened him with how empty they felt. But today, he stepped into them with a steady breath, a pair of gardening gloves and determination. Linda's garden had always been her sanctuary. Rows of hydrangeas, clusters of rosemary, a corner where she once planted marigolds just to make the world brighter. After her death, the garden had wilted, overgrown, neglected, a mirror of the silence inside the house. But now, kneeling in the soft earth, Charlie pressed his palms into the soil and felt something he hadn't felt in months. A beginning. He trimmed the faded branches, cleared dead leaves, gently unearthed bulbs Linda planted long before illness dimmed her strength. Each small motion carried a weight: remembrance, regret, gratitude. It wasn't about restoring flowers. It was about restoring himself. Around mid-morning, he heard footsteps on the gravel. Mara approached, carrying 2 iced teas and wearing the soft smile he hadn't seen on her since before everything fell apart. "You're doing it," she said, handing him a glass. "Mom would love this." Charlie wiped sweat from his brow. "She'd tell me I'm pruning all wrong." "No," Mara said softly. "She'd tell you she's proud of you." He paused, letting that warmth settle through him. Mara had been coming by almost daily since the sentencing, helping with chores, helping with silence, helping with grief that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "I'm thinking of moving closer," she said suddenly, watching him prune a hydrangea bush. "Not far, maybe a few blocks. I want to be around more, if that's okay." Charlie looked up at her, the woman his little girl had grown into, the daughter who once doubted him but now stood so firmly beside him. "I'd like that," he said simply. She nodded, emotion flickering in her eyes but not quite spilling over. She walked back toward the porch, leaving him with space, knowing he needed it. By afternoon, Jason arrived. He didn't come with excuses or explanations, just quiet steps and a kind of cautious humility that felt unfamiliar on him. He stood near the garden bed, watching Charlie work. "I started therapy," Jason murmured, voice strained. "Last week." Charlie kept pruning, giving him the safety of not being stared at. "Good," he said gently. Jason swallowed. I needed it. The anger I carried, the resentment, I didn't even know how much it twisted me." Charlie nodded. Grief makes shadows out of things that were already difficult to see. Jason looked at the ground. "Dad, Charlie shook his head, cutting him off softly. "You don't owe me a speech." Jason's shoulders shook with relief and sorrow at the same time. He stepped closer, placing a hand on Charlie's back, a gesture so rare between them that it surprised them both. "I want to be better," Jason whispered. "For Mom, for you." Charlie turned, placing his weathered hand on Jason's forearm. "Then we'll figure it out, together." And for the first time since Linda's passing, Jason managed a small, genuine smile. A few days later, Frost visited. She didn't come with documents or evidence or court updates. She came in plain clothes, leaning against the porch rail while Charlie washed his gardening tools. "You know," she said, sipping the coffee Mara handed her, "not everyone comes out of something like this standing upright." Charlie chuckled lightly. "Don't feel upright most days." "That's how I know you're doing better than you think," Frost replied. She glanced at the garden. "Linda would be proud." He didn't answer, but the gratitude in his eyes was enough. Frost set her cup down. "We closed Victor's multi-state cases. More victims are stepping forward. The DA is building broader charges." Her jaw tightened. "Some of those people had no one speaking for them. You did more than just get justice for your wife. You helped them too." Charlie bowed his head, overwhelmed but steady. "I just wanted to keep it from happening again." "That's why you're going to make a difference," Frost said. "We could use volunteers, people willing to educate seniors, families, communities about finance. Exploitation, real voices, real stories." Charlie hesitated, then nodded. Tell me where to start. Word spread slowly through town. People who had once whispered about him in grocery aisles now approached him with remorse etched in their expressions. One neighbor brought over a homemade casserole and apologized for misjudging the situation. A church member wept as she said she never should have believed Victor's rumors. Even those who hadn't taken sides found themselves wanting to reconcile. Charlie accepted every apology with quiet grace, not out of obligation, but because holding anger was too heavy, and letting go felt like returning to air after months underwater. Spring continued its slow bloom. The hydrangeas unfurled delicate blossoms. New shoots appeared in places Charlie thought were dead. The garden was becoming whole again, but so was he. On a late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the breeze carried the scent of fresh soil, Charlie sat on the porch steps. Mara watered the garden. Jason tucked away a bag of mulch. Frost had left half an hour earlier, promising to send volunteer schedules. Charlie breathed deeply, slow, full, steady. Not because the pain was gone. Not because the past had healed. But because, for the first time in months, the future felt like something he could step into instead of run from. The pieces weren't all in place yet. But they finally felt like his to rebuild. The evening sun dipped low over Savannah, casting a warm orange glow through the living room windows of Charlie's home. He was setting a kettle on the stove when he heard it, a hesitant knock at the front door. Not forceful, not angry, just trembling. When he opened it, Jason stood on the porch, shoulders hunched, hands shaking, eyes swollen from tears he was no longer trying to hide. "Dad," he whispered, voice cracking at the very first syllable, "can I come in?" Charlie nodded, stepping aside. Jason walked in like a man crossing a battlefield he'd finally realized he didn't want to fight in. He stood in the middle of the living room, fidgeting, nervous, ashamed, before turning around to face his father. "I owe you the apology of a lifetime," he said, words breaking free before he could lose courage. "And I don't know if you'll ever want to hear it, but I need to say it." Charlie remained still, giving him space. Jason swallowed hard, hands trembling at his sides. "I was cruel. I blamed you for everything: Mom's decline, my own guilt, the distance I felt. I trusted Victor because he made me feel important, like I mattered in a way I thought I didn't matter to you." His voice thinned. "But none of that excuses what I did, how I treated you, how I doubted you." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not as your son trying to patch things up, but as a grown man who finally understands that he was wrong." Charlie let the silence breathe before speaking, his voice low but steady. "I hear you." Jason's eyes filled again, like he hadn't expected to be received without anger. Charlie stepped closer, but not too close. "I forgive you," he said, "but forgiveness doesn't erase everything. We'll have to rebuild this one conversation at a time, and I won't pretend the past didn't hurt us both." Jason nodded quickly, relief melting into genuine acceptance. "I understand. I don't want shortcuts. I want to do this the right way." Charlie motioned toward the kitchen table. "Sit, let's talk." And they did. The hours slid by like slow-moving water. They talked as the kettle steamed, as the sky darkened, as the porch light flickered on automatically. What began as stiff, halting sentences shifted into deeper truths, truths that had been buried beneath years of resentment, unspoken expectations, and misunderstandings neither of them ever addressed. Jason confessed the insecurities he'd carried since childhood, believing Mara was the favorite, feeling overlooked when Charlie worked long hours, mistaking quiet love for emotional distance. "I thought silence meant you didn't care," he said softly. Charlie shook his head, eyes warm with regret. "I was raised to think men didn't show much. I thought I was protecting you by being strong, but maybe I should have shown you more than I did." Jason looked down at his hands. "I filled the silence with the worst stories instead of asking for the truth." They talked about Linda, her compassion, her stubbornness, her laughter that filled every corner of the house. Jason's voice trembled when he admitted, "I wanted her to see me the way she saw Mara. And when she got sick, that old jealousy twisted into something ugliest in me." Charlie reached out, placing a hand on Jason's. "Your mother loved you fiercely. She never measured your worth the way you did." Jason broke again, quiet, raw tears slipping down his face. But this time, Charlie didn't stay distant. He held his son's shoulder, grounding him. When Jason finally steadied, he whispered, "I'm going to change, duh. D, not because you want me to, because Mom deserved better from me. And so do you." A faint smile tugged at Charlie's lips, the first real one in months. "That's a good start." The door creaked gently, and Mara peeked inside. She had returned to bring Charlie leftovers but froze when she saw the two of them sitting together, talking, connecting, healing. "Am I interrupting?" she asked softly. Jason shook his head. "No, come in, please." She stepped inside, uncertain at first, but Jason stood and embraced her without hesitation. Mara's breath caught, surprised, but then she hugged him tightly, both of them holding onto something neither thought they'd get back. Charlie watched them, something fragile and hopeful blooming in his chest. They all sat together. No accusations, no walking on eggshells, just three people trying, honestly trying, to rebuild what grief and manipulation had shattered. Mara reached across the table, taking Charlie's hand. Jason did the same on his side. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fully healed, but it was real. For the next hour, laughter, gentle, tentative, returned to the house. Memories of Linda were shared without tears. Plans for the future surfaced in small hints. Sunday dinners, gardening together, Jason's next therapy session, Mara's move to the neighborhood. A fragile peace settled in, delicate but present, like the first green shoot pushing through winter soil. When the night grew late and they finally stood to leave, Jason paused in the doorway. "Dad, thank you for giving me another chance." Charlie nodded, eyes warm. "We'll take it slow, but we'll get there." Jason nodded, accepting that fully. Mara kissed Charlie's cheek. "Get some sleep, okay? Tomorrow we start fresh." After they left, the house was quiet again, but not the hollow quiet of grief. It was the quiet of something mending. Something beginning. Charlie turned off the lights, touched Linda's photo gently, and let out a long, full breath. The kind of breath a man releases only when he finally believes in hope again. The afternoon sun slanted through Samuel's office windows, catching floating dust like slow-moving sparks. Charlie sat across from him, calm but visibly tired, his face worn from months of grief, confrontation, and quiet endurance. He expected legal updates, maybe paperwork needing signatures. He didn't expect what Samuel held in his hands. "Charlie," Samuel said softly, sliding a small, cream-colored envelope across the desk. "This was found in Linda's personal safe. The bank only released it now that probate matters have been settled. It's addressed to you." Charlie stared at it. The envelope wasn't new. The edges were slightly wrinkled, the kind of wrinkles caused by hands that once trembled. Linda's handwriting curved across the front in soft loops he knew instantly. He reached for it slowly, almost afraid to touch it, as if it might crumble under the weight of all the months he'd spent missing her. Samuel leaned back respectfully. "Take all the time you need." Charlie opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a single folded letter, the paper thin and familiar. Linda had always used the same stationery, lavender-scented, embossed with tiny vines along the border. He unfolded it. "My Charlie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry you have to face that pain without me there to hold your hand like we always did." Charlie's breath hitched. He blinked hard, forcing himself to keep reading. "I know you. You will carry guilt you don't deserve. You will look for what you did wrong instead of what was done to us." His eyes blurred. He dug his nails gently into the paper, grounding himself. "There is something I need to tell you, something I didn't have the strength to explain out loud, something I hoped would resolve itself before it became too big." A chill moved through him. "Victor frightened me sometimes, Charlie, not overtly, not with threats, but with pressure, with persuasion, with kindness that felt wrong." Charlie's throat closed. He felt Samuel's gaze soften across the desk, but he kept reading. "He was around too much. He pushed too hard. And when I hesitated, he made me feel guilty, like I was burdening you, like asking for help made me weak. He insisted he was helping. I kept thinking the problem was me, not him." Tears gathered, hot, uncontainable. "I wanted to tell you, but you were already doing so much. I saw the worry in your eyes every time I grew tired. The last thing I wanted was to add more." He inhaled shakily, remembering every night he came home exhausted, every time Linda had smiled at him too quickly, hiding her distress. "You have always protected us, even when we didn't understand it, even when we thought your silence meant distance, not love." A single tear fell onto the page, then another. Charlie bowed his head, shoulders shaking in a way he hadn't allowed since the morning he lost her. "If things ever become unclear, if people ever doubt you, if the world becomes loud, remember this. My trust was never misplaced. I loved you for your steadiness, your strength, your patience. And I knew, no matter what came, you would find the truth." The final line made his chest collapse inward. "You were my safe place, Charlie. You always were. Your Linda." The letter slipped from his hands. For the first time since the funeral, Charlie cried openly, not hidden behind walls or silence or the need to stay composed. These were deep, broken sobs pulled from the center of a heart that had held too much for too long. Samuel didn't speak. He simply placed a supportive hand on the desk and let the moment happen. The office door opened quietly. Mara and Jason stepped inside. Samuel had called them earlier, sensing this might be a moment Charlie shouldn't face alone. They rushed to his side. Mara knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Jason placed a trembling hand over his father's, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, it's okay. We're here." Charlie pulled them close, both of them, and let himself lean into his family in a way he hadn't for years. The grief was heavy, but for once, it didn't feel lonely. The letter settled between them on the desk, its lavender scent faint but unmistakably Linda, soft, gentle, present. When Charlie finally steadied, he folded the letter carefully, reverently. He slid it back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. It wasn't simply a goodbye. It was closure, a lifeline, a truth, a reminder. He placed a hand over the pocket, feeling the weight of Linda's words close to his heart. And as he stood, breathing in deeply, he knew her voice would walk with him from this moment on. Thanksgiving crept into Savannah with the faintest hint of winter chill, a crispness in the air that carried memories of holidays Linda once orchestrated with gentle precision. This year, for the first time since her passing, Charlie decided to host the gathering. Not because he felt ready, he wasn't entirely sure he ever would be, but because something inside him whispered that it was time. He woke early, the house quiet, morning light stretching softly across the living room floorboards. He set the dining table the way Linda used to, simple plates, cloth napkins, the good silverware they rarely used unless it was a special occasion. He hesitated when he opened the drawer where Linda once kept her favorite candles. His fingers brushed against them, and he chose the white ones she always lit on holidays. By noon, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted vegetables, scents that warmed the cold corners time had carved into the walls. Jason arrived first. He stepped inside carrying 2 casserole dishes, nervous but determined. "I tried Mom's sweet potato recipe," he said, avoiding Charlie's eyes at first, "and her cornbread stuffing. I thought it would be good to, keep her traditions going." Charlie nodded. She'd like that. Jason exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. He moved toward the kitchen, lifting lids, checking temperatures, focusing intently on the dishes, anything to keep himself steady. For the first time in months, his hands didn't shake. A few minutes later, Mara arrived, a box tucked carefully under her arm. "Dad," she said, stepping inside with a warm grin, "look what I found in the attic." She set the box on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were pieces of Linda's Thanksgiving decor, the tiny ceramic pumpkin she loved, the embroidered table runner she'd used for 20 years, the wreath she hung on the door each November. "I thought we should bring some of her back into the house today," Mara said, voice soft. Charlie touched the table runner gently. She'd be smiling. Together, they decorated. Jason hung the wreath. Mara arranged the pumpkins along the windowsill. Charlie placed Linda's favorite candle in the center of the dining table, lighting it carefully. As the flame flickered, something loosened in the air. Something old, something painful, something heavy. When they finally sat down to eat, the three of them looked at each other across the table in a way that felt unfamiliar but comforting. The tension of the past months was gone, not forgotten, not erased, but softened. "Okay," Mara said with a small smile. "Who wants to start with something they're thankful for?" Jason cleared his throat. "I'll go," he said, surprising them both. He looked at Charlie. "I'm thankful for second chances and for this family, even when we break a little." Charlie's eyes stung, but he nodded. "I'm thankful for both of you," he said, "and for getting through something I wouldn't wish on any family." Mara blinked back emotion. "I'm thankful we're here, together. It's more than I hoped for a few months ago." They began to eat, conversation weaving gently through the meal. At first it was small, light, cautious. Then it grew. They reminisced about Linda's traditions. They laughed softly about her insistence that the cornbread never stay in the oven a second too long. They remembered the years she hosted nearly 20 people at once without ever breaking a sweat. And then something remarkable happened. They laughed. Not forced, not out of politeness. Real, warm laughter, the kind that bubbled up unexpectedly, filling the dining room with echoes that had been absent far too long. For the first time since Linda's funeral, the house felt like a home again. After dinner, Charlie stepped into the living room while Mara and Jason washed dishes together. He paused near Linda's favorite chair, the one where she'd done crossword puzzles every morning. The candlelight from the table cast a soft glow across the room, and for a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, Charlie felt her presence. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as warmth. As love. He closed his eyes, letting that feeling settle where grief once lived. Later, when Jason and Mara finished tidying the kitchen, they gathered again in the living room, each holding a cup of tea. No one spoke for a while, and the quiet between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, healing, honest. Charlie breathed deeply and felt something he hadn't in months. Safety, stability, hope. The shadows that had clung to every corner of the house since Linda's passing had finally begun to lift. Not because grief was gone, but because love had grown larger. As the evening settled and laughter softened into comfortable silence, Charlie looked at his children and realized that the pieces of his family, once shattered, were slowly forming something whole again. Something new. Something strong. Something filled with light. Early spring settled gently over Savannah, the kind of morning where the air carried a faint sweetness and the world felt like it was waking up slowly. Charlie walked the familiar gravel path of the cemetery, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, Linda's letter folded carefully inside. The Whitford family plot sat beneath a canopy of blooming dogwood trees. Their white petals fluttered in the breeze, quiet, delicate, like small blessings drifting down from branches touched by heaven. When Charlie reached Linda's grave, he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. He knelt slowly beside the stone. Linda, Mariewhitford. Beloved wife and mother. 1955, 2023. He traced the letters with a trembling hand. "Hi, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's been a while since I came alone." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The wind rustled the grass, tugging gently at his jacket as if urging him to go on, to release the burden he'd carried for so long. "I should have protected you sooner," he whispered. "I should have seen what he was doing. I should have known." He swallowed, voice tightening. "But once I understood, once I saw the truth, I stayed quiet, even when it tore me apart." He sat back on his heels, looking out across the rows of headstones. "Everyone asked why I didn't defend myself, why I didn't fight back when they yelled at me, when our own son blamed me." His jaw tensed, remembering the graveside accusations, the courtroom distrust, the lonely nights. But speaking too soon would have tipped him off. He would have run. He would have buried the evidence. And justice, the justice you deserved, would have slipped right through my fingers. He exhaled shakily. "So I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I needed Victor to believe he had already won." Footsteps sounded softly behind him. Jason and Mara approached the grave, neither rushing nor hesitating. They walked side by side, not as fractured pieces of a broken family, but as a growing unit, cautiously stitched back together by truth, loss, and love. Jason's voice was quiet. "Dad, are you okay?" Charlie nodded. "I will be." Mara knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. "We wanted to come with you. Mom would have liked that." He looked at her, then at Jason, who met his gaze without flinching, his expression full of something deeper than apology, something closer to understanding. Charlie turned back to Linda Stone. "Your mom, she always trusted me," he said, "even when she couldn't tell me what was happening, even when she felt scared and guilty and confused." He rested a hand over his jacket pocket. "And she gave me something I didn't realize I needed." He reached inside and pulled out the envelope, worn now, smoothed from being read again and again. He unfolded it, eyes brushing once more over the familiar handwriting before he placed it gently at the base of the stone. "I stayed silent," he whispered, "because speaking too soon would have cost us everything. It would have cost you justice, and it would have cost our kids the truth they deserved." The letter settled against the stone, the breeze catching its edge but not lifting it away. It almost seemed to glow in the soft spring light. Jason stepped closer to his father, his voice thick. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on us, for not giving up on her." Charlie placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, a gesture that once felt rare but now felt right. "We got through it," he said. "We're still getting through it." Myra leaned her head against Charlie's arm. "Mom would be proud of you." Charlie's chest tightened. "I hope so." A gentle wind swept across the cemetery, rustling the dogwood petals until they drifted around the three of them like soft, white feathers. Charlie closed his eyes, letting the breeze wash over him, calm, warm, almost like an embrace. He stood slowly, the stiffness in his legs reminding him of his age but not his fragility. As he looked at his children, no longer divided, no longer lost, he felt something settle inside him. Peace. Real. Earned. Quiet as breath. He turned back to Linda's grave one last time. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the stillness with a clarity the wind didn't dare swallow. "My silence wasn't weakness," Charlie said. "It was the only way to protect the ones I loved, even from themselves."